The dog smelled the money from outside the house. $24 million sealed inside a suburban attic wall. And the man who hid it got to keep $4 million of it. It was the 28th of June, 2016, Miami Lakes, Florida. A gated street of palm trees and clean driveways, the kind of block where nothing ever happens. The house on Northwest 169th Terrace sat on a palm-lined street of spacious, well-kept houses, quiet and unremarkable, offering no hint of what it held. 2 stories tall, painted the color of a ripe mango. Detectives from the Miami-Dade Tactical Narcotics Team spread across the lawn with a search warrant, while their cash-sniffing dog worked the outside walls, losing its mind at something it could smell but could not see. In January 2026, Netflix released The Rip, with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck playing Miami cops who walk into a stash house and find a fortune. That movie sent millions of people hunting for this story. Hollywood gave you cartels, a crooked agent, and a firefight. Here is what actually happened. The man who owned that mango-colored house was Luis Hernandez Gonzalez. 44 years old, the owner and operator of Blossom Experience, a North Miami-Dade store selling lights, fans, and other equipment for indoor gardening. Neighbors described the family as nice, but largely guarded, rarely interacting with them. And by the summer of 2016, law enforcement had been circling him for 11 years without ever putting a handcuff on him. This is the story of a quiet shop owner who investigators believed became the teacher, supplier, and quiet banker for an entire underground industry. It is the story of the biggest pile of cash Miami-Dade police had ever seized. And it is the story of a room full of money that, by law, nobody was allowed to leave. Because here is the question the headlines never answered. If Luis was disciplined enough to build $24 million in cash without getting caught, why was he burying it in buckets instead of spending it? Answer that, and you understand how the money side of the drug business really works. And the answer starts with a garden store. To understand Luis, you have to understand what was happening inside ordinary houses across South Florida in the early 2000s. Marijuana growing had moved indoors. Spare bedrooms became gardens. Closets became nurseries. Entire suburban homes were gutted, rewired, and converted into farms that never saw the sun. And every one of those hidden farms needed the same things: high-powered lights, ventilation fans, fertilizer, timers, water lines, all of it perfectly legal to sell. That was the world where Luis built his business. Blossom Experience sat in North Miami-Dade, its shelves stocked for indoor gardening, and on paper it served hobbyists and orchid lovers. In practice, the business was believed to cater to Miami's robust but illegal marijuana grow house industry, and growers reportedly came to that counter from across the country. It was a family operation, too. His sister Salma, 12 years younger, worked at the shop alongside him. Pleasant people, polite people, people who smiled, waved, and told you absolutely nothing. And here is the thing you have to understand about that business model. Selling a lamp is legal. Selling a fan is legal. But detectives came to believe the store was not really selling equipment at all. It was selling knowledge. The customers were not paying for hardware. They were paying for the man behind the counter, a man who understood exactly how to turn a 3-bedroom house into a farm worth more than the house itself. Law enforcement noticed early. In 2005, DEA agents said Luis discussed marijuana sales while under surveillance, though no charges followed. Nothing happened at all. He went back behind the counter, and the store kept growing. That was the first sign of what he was becoming. Not a man who got lucky, a man who was careful. And in this world, careful men are the ones who end up with rooms full of money. Remember the telephone in that store? It sits quietly in the background of this entire story. And in the end, it is the thing that destroys him. Now let me show you how investigators believed the operation actually worked, piece by piece. The opportunity was Miami itself. By the 2010s, the grow house economy in South Florida was profitable and everywhere. an illegal industry hiding inside ordinary real estate. Growers needed equipment, but a grower cannot walk into a regular hardware store and ask which lamp works best in a closet full of cannabis. He needs a store where nobody asks questions. Better yet, a store where the owner already knows the answers. That was the inside connection. And the inside connection was Luis himself. He never needed to corrupt anyone. He was the trusted expert an entire industry required. Detectives were so convinced of it that they regularly followed customers after the customers left his shop, tracking where the lights and fans ended up. Then it went further. In 2010, a confidential source secretly recorded him discussing cultivation techniques and offering to purchase a future crop. Think about what that means. Investigators now believe the man was not just outfitting the farms. He wanted the harvest, too. The execution was almost boring, and that was the genius of it. Open the store in the morning, sell legal products across the counter, give advice, answer the phone, close at night. No corners, no crews, no gunmen. Just a shop owner who, authorities said, was recorded giving advice on how to care for marijuana plants and later admitted to helping customers grow cannabis. The money side was just as simple. Prosecutors said he hid his money so the government would not see the profits he was making selling to marijuana growers and traffickers. Cash came in, cash disappeared, year after year. And the problem, the reason it could never last, is that a business built on trust has 1,000 doors. Any customer, any caller, any friendly voice on that store telephone could be wearing a wire. Twice, the government came close. The surveillance in 2005, the recording in 2010. Twice, no arrest came. 11 years of attention, 0 handcuffs. Meanwhile, Luis was quietly living like a man who had already won. He bought a lot and had a mango-colored, 5-bedroom, 2-story home built in Miami Lakes, inside a gated community of palm trees and clean sidewalks. There were Rolex watches, at least 5 of them. And in a hallway of that house stood a statue of St. Lazarus, the saint countless Cuban families keep close for healing and protection. Hold that image. The statue matters more than you think. And keep the year 2016 in your head as we go. Because while Luis was living quietly behind his gates, a federal tape recorder hundreds of miles away was already spinning. His voice was on it. He had no idea. First, the scheme almost nobody talks about. Not the marijuana, the money. Luis faced the same problem every successful trafficker in history has faced. Cash is heavy, cash is loud, and cash leaves footprints the moment it touches a bank. American banks must report cash transactions above $10,000. Federal prosecutors said that between 2010 and 2016, Luis pushed $17.7 million through staggered deposits and money orders. Each transaction sized to slide under the government's reporting line. That maneuver has a name in federal law: structuring. His own attorney would later use the street name for it, smurfing. And it is a crime all by itself, even if the cash came from selling lemonade. But you cannot smurf a whole fortune through a garden store without lighting up every alarm in the banking system. So the rest of the money simply never touched a bank. The execution was pure hardware store logic. Bundles of $100 bills, sealed in heat-sealed bags, stuffed into orange 5-gallon Home Depot buckets, the Homer's all-purpose kind, sold for paint and drywall mud, 24 buckets in all. And the vault was no afterthought. Investigators came to believe the secret attic compartment was built into the house during its construction. Behind the drywall, a hidden room. The door was a false wall, and the false wall had a trigger. A garden rake lay in the attic, with a cable running from its handle into the wall. Lift the rake, and the drywall gave way, a false wall sliding open on the hidden room. And in front of the secret compartment stood the statuette of St. Lazarus, a household guardian posted in front of a buried fortune. If you have watched The Rip, you remember the false wall and the buckets stacked in the dark. That detail is real. The movie just never showed you the rake. Understand what that vault really was. It was a confession written in drywall. Every bucket said the same thing. This is money I can never explain, never invest, never spend in the open. On paper, Luis may have been one of the richest criminals in Miami, and he was living as a garden store owner who could not touch his own fortune. The money did not work for him. He worked for the money. Then he made the decision that ended everything. Authorities said Luis was involved in trafficking marijuana to Tennessee along with 2 other men, and when growers in that pipeline had problems with their plants, Luis picked up the phone and coached them. Here is what he did not know. The feds in Tennessee were already closing in on those Miami pot growers, and every word of his coaching was landing on a federal wiretap. The growers were arrested. The recording survived, and the line Luis had been teaching on belonged, for all practical purposes, to the United States government. That tape changed everything, because it solved the government's 11-year problem. Watching Luis had never been enough. Following his customers had never been enough. Now they had his voice, connected to a live federal trafficking case, a probe into a marijuana operation stretching from South Florida to Tennessee, built through surveillance, confidential sources, wiretaps, and coordinated law enforcement work across state lines. The pipeline itself was simple. Product grown cheap in hidden Florida bedrooms was worth a premium out of state. The connection back to Miami was expertise. The execution failure was the telephone, and the problem, for everyone involved, arrived wearing federal badges. Which brings us to the other man in this story, Chris Cassiano, a supervisor on the Miami-Dade Police Department's Tactical Narcotics Team, a unit cops called TNT, a working narcotics cop, and a father. That summer, his son Jake was just a little boy, 5, maybe 6 years old. Cassiano's world had its own vocabulary for what his team did. They call it a rip because it is literally what it sounds like. We are going to rip your stuff. We are going to take your stash. Fast, aggressive, in and out. Remember that word. In a few years, it becomes the title of a movie, and the reason you are watching this. The takedown moved in stages. First, the store. Detectives hit Blossom Experience and discovered a safe with large sums of money inside. When federal prosecutors later totaled what came out of the business, it was over $665,000 in currency and $42,000 in money orders. For a shop selling fans and fertilizer, that is not a rounding error. That is a second business hiding inside the first, and the store gave them the house. On the 28th of June, 2016, Cassiano's team rolled up to the mango-colored home on Northwest 169th Terrace with a search warrant. Before a single officer crossed the threshold, the dog told them everything. The narcotics team's cash-sniffing dog began alerting outside the house, an unmistakable signal that large sums of currency were nearby. The dog could legitimately smell the insane volume of money in the house from outside, and that is what tipped the team that this was far more than they thought. The handlers watched it happen and understood. They were not about to find thousands. They were about to find a mountain. Inside, detectives climbed into the attic, and lying in the insulation they found it. A gardening rake, with a steel cable running from its handle straight into the wall. Nobody stores a rake in an attic. Somebody hides a handle in one. The trap Luis had spent years building was about to open, just not for the people he built it for. An officer lifted the rake. The cable pulled. The drywall shifted, and the false wall swung away from a hidden room. Stacked in the dark were the buckets. Orange. 5-gallon Home Depot. 24 of them, packed to the lids with sealed bricks of $100 bills. Officers brought sledgehammers to break through the wall and pull them free. Downstairs, St. Lazarus kept his post in the hallway, a saint of the sick and the poor standing watch over more money than most banks hold in their vaults. Alongside the cash, the search turned up marijuana strains labeled Chernobyl and Super Skunk, 4 types of anabolic steroids, and a loaded TEC-9. Cassiano noticed something else in that house. Cameras. He immediately spotted cameras and got the feeling his team was being watched. Now came the part the Rip turned into its entire plot, and this part is completely true. Officers are required to count seized cash on scene by hand twice. It is a rule built to protect cops from the accusation everyone in that room is silently thinking. So they counted, bundle by bundle, bucket by bucket, hour after hour. By one account, the count took investigators 42 hours. The newspapers first printed one number, and the truth was messier. The Miami Herald reported $22 million stuffed in the buckets, plus more than $600,000 at the business, while other outlets put the total at $24 million. Federal prosecutors logged over $21 million seized from the residence alone. However you slice it, it was, at the time, the largest cash seizure in the history of the Miami-Dade Police Department. Cassiano put it plainly to a friend years later. "That amount of money," he said, "does dark things to the soul." His team stared into it for the better part of 2 days and walked out clean. Luis was taken away in handcuffs at last, 11 years after the government first started watching. He was charged in state court with money laundering, cannabis trafficking, conspiracy, and a weapons count, and his sister, Salma, was arrested too. Then postal inspectors found the paper trail, suspicious bank deposits, each one under $10,000, and the case went federal, not over the plants, but over the math. On February 7, 2018, he pled guilty in a plea deal that allowed him to keep $4 million, his home, his hydroponics supply store, and 5 Rolex watches. The drug charges were dropped as part of that deal. Sentencing was first scheduled for April 20th, of all the dates on a calendar. And on April 25th, 2018, he was sentenced to 65 months in prison and agreed to forfeit more than $18 million after pleading guilty to federal money laundering and structuring charges. He had faced up to 30 years, and sit with this. The man at the center of the biggest cash seizure Miami-Dade had ever seen has never been convicted of a single drug crime. 5 years and 5 months. Not for the marijuana, for the arithmetic. So, where did everyone land? Luis became a federal case study in how modern kingpins actually fall, not through informants with guns to their heads, but through bank paperwork and a phone he should never have answered. Cassiano stayed on the job, and life dealt him something no raid ever could. His son Jake died of leukemia in 2021, at 11 years old. Cassiano's close friend, the filmmaker Joe Carnahan, had first heard the story of that night while the two worked together on a film around 2020, and he carried it for years. The Rip was announced in June 2024 with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck attached, and it landed on Netflix on January 16, 2026, dedicated to Jake. The Miami-Dade Police Department itself no longer exists by that name, reorganized into the Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office. And in May 2026, 2 of its deputies sued Damon and Affleck for defamation, claiming the film made them look like dirty cops. The fiction was so dark it circled around and wounded the real thing. So here is the final verdict on the movie, and it cuts both ways. The Rip got the strangest details exactly right. The buckets in the hidden attic room were real. The false wall was real. The dog going nuts outside the house was real. The rule about counting the money on scene, twice, by hand, was all true. Even the cameras and the feeling of being watched came straight from Cassiano's memory of that night. But the film moved the house from Miami Lakes to Hialeah. It swapped a Cuban marijuana grow house ring for cartel ties, and a neighborhood bought out to guard the stash. And it invented a murdered captain, a crooked agent, and a gunfight over the money, when the real bust involved no dirty police, no shootouts, and no corruption at all. That is the biggest distortion of them all. The movie says money turns lawmen into thieves. The record says $24 million sat in a room full of tired cops for 2 days, and every single bill was still there at the end. Louis spent a lifetime building a fortune he could never spend, and the only bank he ever trusted was a wall. In the end, the money did not corrupt the men who found it. It buried the man who owned it. If this story got under your skin, subscribe, because there is always another film hiding a stranger true story underneath it. Drop a comment and tell me which one you want broken open next. There is always another wall, and there is always something behind it